Hello, my friend. Today I will tell you another long-forgotten legend. Close your eyes and let the magic transport you to Middle-earth. Our journey begins in the elder hush of the world, when twilight stretched its long fingers over the hills, and the stars were just beginning to blink open their ancient eyes. There stood a forest whose name bore the weight of forgotten things. Fangorn, deep whispering and old beyond reckoning. To some it was a place of fear, where the trees leaned in too closely and the path seemed to shift like the turning of dreams. But to others, those who still listened to the rustle of leaves and the creak of roots beneath the earth, it was a place of memory, a place where the world had not yet forgotten how to listen. In that forest lived a being older than many kingdoms, older even than some of the stars that crowned the night. His name was Barathornne, an ant, a shepherd of trees, carved of bark and bound with moss, slow of speech, but mighty in thought. His eyes, golden and deep, carried the light of many seasons, and his voice, when it rumbled forth, could cause the ground itself to tremble with remembrance. Barathornne had wandered long and far in ages past, through glades where the moon wove silver lace upon the leaves, and across meadows where time itself lingered like dew upon the grass. He was tall, taller than most ants, and his limbs bore the twisted grace of elder oaks. Moss draped from his shoulders like a cloak, and lechan crowned his brow like the quiet coronet of an ancient king. But for all his might and wisdom, Barathornne carried a sorrow older than the stones. He remembered Nimloth. Her name was a song within him, a note that never quite faded. Nimloth, the Antu wife, with hair of willow fronds, and laughter like the shimmer of rain on blossom. Long ago, when the world was younger and kinder, she had danced through the glades beside him, planting gardens in the sun-dappled soil and teaching flowers how to sing. Together they had sung to the saplings in the streams, weaving life through leaf and root. And then she had gone as all the Entwives had. They had left Fangorn to seek lands of light and gentler seasons, where they could grow things in rows and paint the fields with blooms. And then the shadow came, and the lands were burned or changed, and the songs of the Entwives fell silent. Barathornne had searched, oh yes, through forgotten valleys and across the bones of ruined cities, but their trail had vanished like mist at dawn. Even their memories seemed to be slipping from the world. Still he waited, and still he hoped. On a night like this, when the wind sighed with stories and the stars wheeled slowly in the sky, Barathornne stood beside a spring-fed pool deep in the heart of the forest. The water shimmered with starlight, and the trees around him leaned close, listening. It was a slow song, like the turning of the seasons, like the steady growth of roots deep into the dark earth. He sang of Nimloth, of the garden she had promised, of the place where violets would bloom even in winter, and the trees would bow to greet her. The sound rolled through the forest like mist, wrapping around bark and branch, stirring even the slumbering oaks. And then it happened, a whisper on the wind, soft like the rustling of a leaf, but unmistakable. Barathornne, the Ent, froze. His song faltered, a single note lingering in the air like a held breath. He turned his great head slowly, branches creaking, bark cracking faintly as he strained to hear again. "Barathornne, come!" It was her voice, it had to be. No wind could conjure that tone, that cadence, a sound like sunlight on warm stone, like the scent of wildflowers after rain. His golden eyes flared with a sudden brightness. Not hope, no, something deeper, older, a memory made real. He stretched his senses into the earth, into the roots and rivers and fallen leaves. The forest breathed with him, and then he felt it. A pull, soft and insistent, drawing him northward, beyond the reaches of Fangorn, beyond all he had known. The forest stirred around him. Trees murmured in their sleep, and animals hidden in hollows and underbrush paused in their stillness. For the forest knew, the forest remembered. For the first time in many long years, Barathornne moved with purpose. His great limbs, slow and deliberate, shifted with creaks and groans, waking the mosses and stirring the ivy. Each step shook the earth like a heartbeat returned. He left the pool behind, still and shining, and passed beneath the boughs of trees that had stood beside him for centuries. He did not speak. There were no words needed now. The path was not clear, it rarely was, but Barathornne did not need a road. He was older than roads. He was of the world before men and maps and markers. He followed the pull, the whisper of her voice, the thread of memory woven through the very soil. Night passed into dawn, and still he walked. He crossed the outer glades of Fangorn, where the trees grew younger and the shadows less deep. He passed through lands touched by men, fields abandoned, hedges overgrown, where the footprints of war still lingered like bruises upon the land. And still the voice called, "Come." Sometimes it was faint, carried on the cry of a distant hawk or in the hush of the breeze. Other times it rang clear, a note that tugged at his heartwood like a memory returning home. He crossed a stream whose waters whispered of things long buried. He climbed a hill where once a tower had stood, now nothing more than rubble wrapped in ivy. The world had changed. So much had changed, and in every corner he saw it, the scarring. Trees felled, forests cleared, roots hacked away as if they meant nothing. The work of axes, the mark of flame. Barathornne paused one morning in the remains of a grove where saplings had once grown in a perfect circle. Now only stumps remained, gray and rotting. The scent of ash still clung to the earth. He knelt there for a long while, his fingers brushing the ground as if searching for a heartbeat, but there was none. "We were too slow," he murmured at last, his voice low as thunder in a far-off storm. "Too slow to wake, too slow to see." And for a moment the wind seemed to weep with him. But then again the voice Barathornne, softer now, but certain. And so he rose with a groan of bark and the rustling of ancient leaves. He stood tall once more. And the forest watched him go, its guardian awakened, its heart heavy but beating still. Toward the north he walked into lands forgotten, where the sun rose cold and the trees stood thinner, and the whisper of the antwife called him forward into the gathering dusk. The sky stretched overhead in a slow glacial drift of pale gold and whispering silver, the dawn spilling across the land with the hesitance of a dream returning after a long night's wandering. Barathornne moved like a shadow beneath it, not the shadow of fear or malevolence, but of memory, of time older than language, of a presence too deep to name. His footsteps, if such a word could describe the slow, resonant settling of root-like limbs into the earth, pressed into the mossy ground with a reverence so complete it seemed almost like prayer. And in some sense it was. Every movement he made was a liturgy to the land, a meditation on grief and endurance, a song without words for all that had been lost and might still be found. The trees thinned as he journeyed northward, but they did not disappear. Instead, they grew crooked and sparse, like elders standing watch over forgotten graves. The wind moved through them with a mournful grace, stirring the dry leaves, so that they spoke not in rustles, but in sighs, deep, weighted sighs that carried sorrow from branch to branch, like rumors of a death no one dared name. The forest was quieter here, but not silent. There was something in the air, an ache, perhaps, or a kind of listening. The world, it seemed, was watching Barathornne, as if recognizing in him the echo of a time when the woods were sovereign and the speech of trees still carried authority. He passed beneath a ridge where old stones stood in solemn circles, their surfaces carved with the winding glyphs of a language now remembered only by water and moss. Lichen grew thick along their bases, and the grass between them bore the gentle hollows of places once walked by feet that would never return. Barathornne paused there, placing one massive hand, his fingers like the twisted branches of an ancient elm, upon the central stone. The contact was slow, reverent, and when his fingers made contact, the moss seemed to hum, a faint vibration like a whisper running through the spine of the world. "I remember," he rumbled, though no one answered. His voice carried into the still air and hung there, long and resonant. "I remember when the trees sang over this place, when the hills wore green crowns and the roots of the earth held hands beneath the soil. This was once a meeting ground, a place of vows and gentle things." He lowered himself slowly until he sat with his great legs folded beneath him like roots curling into sleep. The dawn light filtered through the thinning canopy in long beams, touching his bark skin with streaks of gold and rose. The air was fragrant here, earthy and cool, with a scent of loam and the memory of rain. He inhaled deeply, the sound of his breath like a wind rising through old boughs. And then he spoke again, not to the forest now, but to the silence within himself. "It is a strange thing," he mused aloud, his voice like the turning of mountains, "to live so long that even one's own sorrow begins to feel like tradition, as though grief were a cloak we wove so finely into ourselves, we forgot the feel of bare bark beneath it. I do not know if I walk toward her or merely toward the shape of my own longing." He fell quiet, his gaze drifting toward the horizon, where low clouds gathered like thoughts not yet spoken. A long moment passed. Then, as though summoned by the very weight of his reflection, a breeze stirred, soft and curious. It brushed against his face and stirred the moss of his beard, curling into his ears with a voice only he could hear. "Come!" He stood again, slowly, deliberately, as though carrying the weight of every season he had ever known. His limbs creaked and his trunk groaned, and the very stones beneath him shifted, acknowledging his movement with the soft grinding of time resuming its ancient course. The land into which he now moved was unfamiliar, not wild in the way that Fangorn had been, but shaped, worn, marked by hands and axes and fire. It bore the sorrow of things touched too often by need, and not enough by love. The trees were younger, yet already twisted. The earth was wounded, its grasses sparse, its streams choked with the bones of fallen branches and the refuse of war. It smelled of ash and rust in the residue of forgotten battles. Barathornne moved through this place with care, though his heart grew heavier with each step. Every broken branch and scorched trunk whispered of loss. Yet amidst the ruin, there were still signs of persistence. a sapling growing from a cracked stone, a single flower pushing up through a charred field. Life clung here, tenacious and fragile, like the last thread of a forgotten song. In one such place, where the remains of a grove stood like burnt-out candles around the ruins of a fallen watchtower, he came upon a pool, shallow, ringed with rushes and the drooping heads of water-lies that seemed to dream even in daylight. The surface reflected the sky, though the reflection was faint, distorted by the ripples of a slow wind and the presence of something beneath. He bent low, his massive form folding like a storm cloud collapsing into rain. His eyes hovered just above the water. In it, he saw her. Not her face, no, not truly, but something that stirred in the way the light moved, a glimmer of the memory of Nimloth, the way her voice would fold itself around his name, the way her laughter would bloom like spring along his branches. He saw it in the way the reeds swayed. He felt it in the weightless hush that hung in the air, as if the whole world were waiting for her next word. "Nimloth," he murmured, not as a question, but as a truth too sacred to name loudly. His reflection shimmered, blurred by tears he could not shed. And beneath that blur, for just a heartbeat, he saw another figure, slender, graceful, haloed by a wreath of silver blossoms. Then the image faded, and the pool returned to stillness. Barathornne remained kneeling beside the water, his gaze distant. "Where did you go?" he asked the silence. "Did the world forget how to see you? Or did you forget how to be seen?" The wind rustled but gave no answer. Only the reeds swayed, brushing against each other like fingers reaching for comfort in the dark. He rose, and this time the weight of sorrow was joined by something else. Not hope, no, not yet, but movement, intention, the beginning of a rhythm beneath the grief. He would walk farther. He would follow the voice. Not just the voice on the wind, but the voice in himself, the part of him that still believed the world could remember how to sing. The sky grew paler as the day deepened, and the land around him whispered of trials yet to come, of axes unshathed, and hearts grown hard against the green. But Barathornne walked onward, the great slow beat of his steps like a distant drum, a song not yet finished, for the forest was not done, and neither was he. As Barathornne moved farther from the gentle familiarity of Fangorn, and deeper into the fractured veins of the northern wilderness, the land began to change around him. Not abruptly, like a door closed or a light extinguished, but subtly, insidiously, in the way a dream turns uneasy without revealing the moment it became a nightmare. Hills rose like the knuckles of a clenched fist, barren and hard, their slopes no longer soft with moss or shaded with green canopies, but scabbed over with stone and bramble. The wind here was sharper, thinner, like a blade drawn too many times from its sheath. It carried no songs, no laughter of leaves, but only the bitter scent of old smoke, of iron rusting in forgotten places, of bark scorched in silence and never spoken of again. The sky, too, had altered its expression. Once a warm dome of celestial hush, it now stretched in vast sheets of gray, stretched with pale clouds that seemed to unravel like old parchment, as if the heavens themselves were trying and failing to recall the stories they once told. The sun, hidden more often than not behind a veil of winter light, cast long shadows that seemed always to point in one direction, as though the land itself wished to guide Barathornne, or perhaps to warn him. It was upon the third evening beyond the border of the familiar that Barathornne came upon what had once been a glade. He knew it for what it had been by the curve of the land, and the memory still imprinted upon the stones that lay like half-buried bones in the grass. This had been a place where the light once fell in golden spears through a ring of birches, where children of men might have gathered in gentler years, their laughter a part of the breeze. Now the birches were stumps, the clearing filled with the detritus of war, shattered spear shafts, the remnants of a ruined banner half submerged in mud, and charred timbers that bore the unmistakable signature of fire not born of natural flame. Barathornne stood at the center of the clearing for a long while, his broad shoulders still beneath the dimming sky. The wind swirled around him, whispering through the broken things, and he could feel the memory of what once was, pressing up against the silence, trying, as all things do in their own way, not to be forgotten. Then at last he spoke. "We are slow," he said, and his voice rumbled through the clearing like thunder crawling beneath the skin of the earth. "So slow that the world outpaces us again and again, until all that is left to us is the mourning of echoes and the tending of graves where no one remembers who lies beneath." His voice fell silent again, but not because he had run out of words. Rather, it was as if the land itself had drawn breath in sorrow and asked him to wait, to listen, to hear its own lamentation. It was then that he heard another voice. Not Nimloth's this time, not the gentle beckoning of memory, but something harsher, more immediate. It came from the edge of the clearing, low and rasping like bark torn from a wounded tree. "Well now," it said in the common tongue, but thickened by an accent as rough as gravel and twice as worn. "A tall one, aren't you? Thought your kind had all gone to moss and myth." Barathornne turned his head slowly. A figure stood there framed by the dying light. An old man, hunched and gaunt, wrapped in tattered leathers and a cloak patched more times than it had threads. His eyes were sunken but alert, his beard gray and wild, and in his hand he held a gnarled walking stick that had clearly once been a branch of something greater. The ant regarded him in silence, then inclined his head ever so slightly, as one ancient tree might to another that had been cut down, but not yet forgotten. "I did not come for speech," Barathornne said at last, the words like stone laid gently in a stream. "And yet I will not silence what has risen to speak." The old man chuckled dryly. "That's a fancy way to say, you'll listen." I wasn't sure if the forest still had ears. Barathorne's eyes, deep and golden, studied him with the slow intensity of a sunrise. "It is not the forest that forgets how to listen," he replied. "It is those who walk upon it with iron in their hands and fire in their hearts who forget how to speak to it." The man lowered himself slowly onto a half-fallen log, the movement stiff with age. He looked out over the ruined glade, his expression darkening. "Aye," he muttered, "and most don't listen even when it screams." Barathornne stepped closer, the ground quivering faintly beneath his weight. "Did you fight here?" The man's hands tightened on the stick, his eyes fixed now on the blackened soil. "Not here," he said, "but not far. We fought because we were told it would save something. A village, a forest, a bit of hope. But when the fire came, it burned all the same. No sides, just ash." There was a silence, then long and reverent. The sky above dimmed further, and a few early stars peeked through the veils of dusk, like watchers who had seen too much to ever rest again. Barathornne lowered himself to the earth, his massive frame folding with grace, uncharacteristic of something so great. He sat across from the man, and for a moment neither moved. Then he spoke again, softer this time. "Pope," he said, turning the word like a leaf between his thoughts. Such a small word, so light, and yet it burdens us more than iron, because we carry it into places where nothing green grows, and still we expect it to bloom. The old man nodded slowly, as if the gesture took more than it once had. And we keep planting it, even when the ground spits it back. Barathornne tilted his head slightly, the motion like a tree bending towards stormlight. "Is that not our nature, then?" he asked. "To plant hope, not where it will grow, but where it must." The man chuckled again, but this time it held less bitterness. "You speak like a sage, but you walk like a warrior." Barathornne looked to the horizon where a faint shimmer of starlight touched the northern hills. "I walk toward memory and wrath, and the place where they are no longer separate." At that the man fell quiet, and when he finally spoke, his voice had changed, gentler now, tinged with something like reverence. "You're looking for someone?" "Yes," Barathornne said, "or something that still remembers her." The old man leaned back, his gaze distant as if seeking something in the stars. "Then I hope the wind guides you and the roots hold you, and whatever wrath stirs in your limbs does not take from you what the world has already stolen." Barathornne stood slowly, and the very ground seemed to rise with him. He looked down at the man and offered a bow. Not deep, but true. "You have not forgotten how to speak," he said. "And you," the man replied, "have not forgotten how to listen." With that, Barathornne turned once more to the north, the glade falling silent behind him, save for the quiet breath of the trees and the soft sigh of a world that had seen too much and still dared to hope. And so the ant walked onward beneath stars that blinked through ash-dark skies, into a land where wrath coiled beneath the soil, like roots twisted by grief, and where the voice of Nimloth called ever onward, not louder, but clearer now, like the sound of a single bell tolling in a valley, long forgotten. The night wore on with the slow solemnity of an old song, one sung too many times to be anything but sacred. And as Barathornne ventured deeper into the shrouded hills of the north, the stars above him seemed to gather like quiet sentinels, drawing their cloaks of ancient light around the sky, as if to shield it from what slept or stirred below. The moon, pale and contemplative, hung low on the horizon, its light dimmed by passing veils of mist that wove through the crags like wandering spirit. And though the air was still, there was a tension within it, like the hush before a storm, or the long-held breath of a creature preparing to weep. Here the land had changed again, not by the will of time alone, but by intrusion. The paths, if they could still be called that, were choked by the remnants of once proud groves. The trees now fallen and left to rot where they lay. Their rings split wide like open wounds, as if even the bones of the forest had been laid bare in some great, unspoken violence. The scent of sap, old and fermented, hung thick in the air, mingling with the acrid traces of metal and the dull, bitter perfume of rusted iron. Twigs snapped beneath Barathornne's feet like brittle bones, and even the stones he passed bore scars, grooves left by dragging chains or scorched marks, where something unforgiving had burned too close to the root. He paused near a hollow where once a spring had flowed. He could feel the memory of it even now in the subtle coolness of the soil, in the way the rocks curved to cradle water that no longer came. He knelt beside it with great reverence, as if the absence itself deserved mourning, and placed his hand upon the earth. A quiet shiver passed through the ground, as though the land itself remembered what it had lost and resented its own forgetting. Once he whispered more to the air than to himself. This place was green, and songs echoed here. Songs not just of trees and roots, but of children and stories, and fires lit not in destruction, but in warmth. The forest shared breath with those who walked gently. He fell silent for a time, as if listening for that breath, as if hoping that in the silence some ghost of it might return. Now he continued at length. Even the silence is brittle. Even stillness feels hunted. He stood slowly, the gesture burdened not by age, but by grief, and turned his gaze to the horizon once more, where distant silhouettes of what had once been trees stood black against the glimmer of moonlight, like mourners frozen in their final lament. His path led him between them, and as he moved, he spoke softly, not with words meant to carry far, but with the deliberate cadence of a ritual. "Every root remembers its first rain," he announced, "and every leaf recalls the light that birthed it. So too must I remember. Even in the face of fire, even in the ash and the sorrow, as if in answer the wind stirred. It moved through the broken boughs with a sound like weeping, though not of weakness or surrender, but of mourning, deep and wide as the sea." It was in that hour, under that hollow sky, that Barathornne heard the second voice. Not a whisper this time, not a dream or memory, but a voice coarse and real, shaped by tongue and breath, and shaded with the weariness of one who had survived too much to speak lightly. "Hail, traveler," it said, though there was no welcome in the tone. Are you beast or ghost, or the echo of some old god? Come to tally the depths of the living." Barathornne turned his massive form, casting long shadows in the moonlight. From the thickets ahead emerged a woman, tall for a mortal, though not so tall as he, cloaked in deep forest hues, her face half-shadowed beneath a hood lined with fur. She carried a staff not unlike his own, though smaller, humbler, a thing of knotted ashwood bound with iron rings, from which dangled a talisman of carved bone. Her eyes, when they met his, were weary but clear, like those of one who has watched many flames die, and yet still guards the spark. "I am none of those things," Barathornne said slowly, and the ground seemed to listen. "Nor am I the judgment you fear. I am simply a voice from the deep wood, a breath of green the world has tried to forget." The woman studied him a moment longer and inclined her head, not in deference, but in recognition. "You are Ent," she said, "though I had thought your kind vanished into myth or into silence." "We are not vanished," he replied, "only scattered, only sleeping." She stepped closer, her boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. "And what wakes you, O shepherd of trees? What grief draws you north through ruin and ash and sorrow?" Barathornne looked toward the north again, where the wind pulled faint threads of mist through the highlands, like the trailing veil of a widow. "I seek one I have long thought lost," he said. "Not only her, but what she stood for, what her song meant to the world, when the world still paused to listen." The woman nodded slowly, her gaze now distant. "Many things have been lost," she said, "and many more buried so deeply that even the bones of the earth dare not name them. But sometimes," she added, her voice gentler now. "The wind remembers, and if you follow it, sometimes it will lead you not to answers, but to places where the questions begin again." Barathorne's eyes, lit with the dim golden fire of an old dawn, turned back to her. "You speak like one who has walked among the ruins." "I have," she said simply, "and I have listened at the thresholds where the old songs still echo faintly. I have seen men burn what they do not understand and flee from what they do. But I have also seen the smallest root crack through stone and the faintest seed take root in ash." There was silence then, but it was not empty. It was filled with the quiet communion of two who understood not only loss, but the necessity of walking through it. Finally, Barathornne reached into the pouch bound at his side, a satchel of woven vine and lichen that pulsed faintly with the memory of moonlit glades, and withdrew a single seed, round and silvered with a sheen like starlight. He held it out to her. "This," he said, "is the last of a tree that grew in the heart of Fangorn long before the towers of men rose and fell. I do not know if it will grow in this soil, but perhaps." He trailed off, not because he had nothing left to say, but because the silence itself had become part of the truth. The woman took the seed gently, cradling it in both hands as if it were something alive and watching. "Hope," she murmured, "is not in the knowing. It is in the planting." And with that they parted without farewell, without names. For in such moments names are unnecessary, and farewells would be a lie. Barathornne moved on, his shadow stretching long behind him, and in the place where they had stood, the wind settled for a moment, still and listening, as if it too was remembering the feel of roots breaking through stone. The path Barathornne followed was no longer a path in the way that men or elves would recognize. There were no cart tracks, no prints in the loam, no guiding stones or lanterns left by kindly hands. Rather, it was a slow unfolding of direction from within, a murmur rising from the soil, from the bones of the land, from the shifting wind that twisted like smoke among the trees, if trees they could still be called, gnarled, hollow, and stretched like mourners frozen mid-lee. Their branches did not reach for the sun, for there was little sun here to reach toward. Instead, they curled downward or inward, as though remembering something too painful to name and growing inward into their grief. The sky had grayed again, not with the softness of mist or the melancholy of rain, but with a dense pour that had the weight of ash, though none fell. It hung above the hills like a silence that had grown too heavy to lift. Beneath it, the earth gave way to broken outcroppings of shale and iron-tinged stone, the colors gone pale and strange, as though the land itself had forgotten how to wear its own skin. The air smelled of old fire, and moss turned sour from too much shade. And when Barathornne walked, his steps sounded not like the footfalls of a creature passing through, but like the slow heartbeats of something returning, something ancient, something that remembered. It was here, among the fractured ridges and long dead hollows, that Barathornne came upon the remnants of what had once been a garden. Not a garden in the way of the elves, who woe their blooms like poetry, nor like that of men who tamed and tilled and coaxed beauty from labor, but something older, wilder. The bones of the soil remembered it, and Barathornne felt it the moment he stepped into the ruin. The lingering warmth of care, the ghost of cultivation not done for dominion, but for reverence. The stones had once formed circles, soft and irregular, shaped by hand, but not mastered. The beds had been tiered, following the land's natural dips and swells, and though now choked with bramble and encroached upon by wind-blown seed, Barathornne could still trace their intention in the way the earth curved, welcoming like open arms. A cracked urn lay half-buried near the edge of a dry stream bed, its side painted with faded vines, and beside it long decayed stalks of what might once have been sunberry, or something older still, a plant now lost even to the songs of the elves. Barathornne knelt slowly and laid his hand to the ground. He did not speak at first, for there is a silence required in such places. Not merely respect, but listening, true listening. The kind that asks not for answers, but for remembrance. The wind moved softly around him, brushing his bark skin like a hand trailing through water. He let it speak. When at last he opened his mouth, the words were shaped by breath and sorrow and the long ache of longing. She was here, he said, though to whom he did not know, or one like her. This place bears her touch, the shape of her tending. She would have knelt here, fingers in the soil, singing to the roots in that voice that made the morning open like a blossom. Her presence was not a command, but a welcome, and the plants answered not with obedience, but with joy. He closed his eyes. Behind his lids he saw her not clearly, not like memory, but as a feeling, a warmth. The way her laughter would fold itself into the breeze, becoming indistinguishable from it, as though nature had always been meant to carry her voice. The way her steps never bruised the grass, the way her eyes, when turned toward growing things, did not see what was useful, but what was possible. And now only absence, an absence that cried out. She left, Barathornne said, and the words were not spoken with bitterness, but with the tired recognition of someone naming a truth that had grown like ivy around his heart. They all did, Entwives, seekers. They went out to shape gardens where light would fall more gently, and soil would be theirs to choose. But the world changed beneath them, and the fires came and the steel followed, and what they made was swept away. The trees around the clearing gave no answer, but the wind seemed to pause as though considering. A voice came then, sudden as a footfall in a cathedral. Perhaps they changed too. Barathornne did not startle. He simply turned his gaze, slow and deliberate, toward the source of the voice. Another ant stood at the edge of the clearing, though this one bore little resemblance to the ants of Fangorn. He was smaller, narrower in the trunk, and his limbs were twisted like those of a tree grown in rocky soil, forced to bend for every breath of sunlight. His bark was a dark, silvery gray, and moss clung to him like a cloak. But it was his eyes that marked him as kin. They were old, not in years, but in depth. Eyes that had watched things die slowly and never found words for the watching. Barathornne rose, the motions slow and full of meaning. Aranduil, he said, naming him. It has been long, longer than some trees, the smaller ant replied, and not as quiet as I would like. They stood in silence for a time, the air between them heavy with the weight of shared time and divergence. Then Theanduil stepped forward, his gaze scanning the ruined garden with an expression that was not quite sorrow, not quite anger. I found this place a decade ago, he said, or longer. Time is strange out here. It sang to me, though faintly. I stayed a while, tended what was left, but the song faded. Barathornne watched him. You stayed. I tried, Thanduil replied. But trying is not the same as belonging. And when the men came again with their torches, I could not protect even what remained. Barathornne lowered his gaze to the cracked urn, the withered vines. "It is not weakness," he said slowly, "to fail at preserving what should not have needed protection in the first place." Thewel's voice dropped, became quieter. "But it is grief all the same." A silence grew between them again, but this time it was not heavy. It was reverent, like the silence after a prayer, or the stillness that lingers between the last note of a song and the moment when you must open your eyes again. At last, Therill turned to him. "Why have you come, Barathornne? Why now?" Barathornne looked north, his eyes scanning the horizon as though he could see through stone and distance. "I heard her voice," he said, "or the echo of it. It called to me. I do not know if it was memory or longing or something else entirely, but it stirred me." "And if it is not her," Fandel asked, "if it is nothing more than the voice we give to our own desire?" Barathornne turned to him then, and the wind stirred behind his shoulders like the breath of old gods. "Then I will walk until the voice is silent," he said. "And in walking I will remember. And in remembering perhaps I will plant again, not just trees, but hope. Hope that even if she is gone, the shape of her touch can remain. Hope that what was lost does not have to be forgotten." Tandil was silent, and then he nodded once deeply. "Then walk well, brother," he said, "and plant gently." And as Barathornne turned once more to the north, the wind rose behind him, not fierce, but sure, and the forest watched him go, and whispered his name. Barathorne's path from the ruined garden twisted into the high country, where the bones of the earth rose more boldly through the skin of soil, revealing jagged spires of slate and granite, carved by time and scoured by winds that had never learned to rest. Here the trees were fewer, and those that remained clung to the hillsides with gnarled roots like the fingers of forgotten giants, their limbs bent by centuries of storm. There was a rawness in the land, a kind of exposed truth unsoftened by foliage or stream. The silence here was not one of peace, but of waiting, and the air smelled of stone dust, wild thyme, and something older, fainter, a scent that drifted like memory, both earthy and mournful, like the perfume of dried leaves held too long between pages of a book no one had read in an age. The sky stretched wide and colorless above him, an endless vault of pale cloud and failing light. The sun had not broken through for days, and though it was not cold in the way mortals know cold, no frost rimmed the rocks, and no ice clung to branch or blade. There was a chill here of a different kind. It sank deeper than skin, threading through the marrow of wood and bone alike, the kind of chill that whispered of things lost too long ago, of warmth that might never return, of voices stilled beneath the roots of time. Barathornne walked steadily, his vast form casting long shadows across the bare hills, the rhythm of his strides matching the slow throw of the earth beneath him. He felt the mountain's thoughts as one feels a storm on the skin before it breaks, deep, ruminant, ancient. There was no malice in the stones, but there was no welcome either. This was land that had not forgotten the fires of war, nor the bite of axes. It remembered all things, as mountains do, and had watched without blinking. By midday he reached a pass where the wind howled without mercy, threading through the cliffs and the rock like a song without melody. And there, beneath a crumbling arch of basalt, he came upon a figure, a solitary presence wrapped in layers of fur and wool, seated upon a stone as if they had been waiting for centuries. The traveler's hood was drawn low, and in their lap they held a small bundle wrapped in linen. Nearby, a staff rested against the stone, its surface carved with sigils that spoke of old languages, the kind that weren't spoken so much as remembered by the wind and the water. Barathornne paused. The figure did not move, did not speak, but their presence was like a knot in the current of the world, a still point in a sea of motion. "I do not seek counsel," Barathornne said, his voice carried softly by the wind. "But I do not turn from it when it is offered in truth." The figure looked up, and though the hood remained, Barathornne saw the glint of eyes, not young, not ancient, but weary in the way of those who have watched too many dawns rise without hope of warmth. "I have waited here," the traveler replied, their voice neither male nor female, but something in between, as though shaped by both silence and song. "Not for you, perhaps, but for one like you, one who remembers when trees were not merely timber and hills not merely obstacles. You walk with a weight most would not choose to bear." Barathornne lowered himself slowly, the movement deliberate, solemn, as if the very act of sitting were a rite. "I carry memory," he said, "and the sorrow of all that memory cannot restore." The traveler nodded. "That is the burden of the old, and of those who remember not only the shape of things, but their spirit." There was a long silence between them then, the kind that deepens rather than breaks the connection between those who share it. The wind passed around them like a tired breath, and the mountains seemed to lean in closer. Finally, Barathornne spoke again. "I am searching," he said, "not only for Nimloth, though her voice calls to me still, faint as the echo of a star in a well, but for something deeper, a root, perhaps, or the seed of something forgotten. I do not know, only that there is a wrongness in the land, a silence that is not peace, and I must answer it." The traveler tilted their head slightly, as if weighing his words in a scale unseen. "There is a fracture beneath this land," they said, "not a wound of stone, but of spirit. Something was taken long ago, not by blade or fire, but by forgetfulness, and the land has not forgiven, nor has it healed." Barathornne looked down at the earth, at the pale lichen growing in cracks along the stone, at the dried moss clinging like memory to the northern face of the pass. "Forgetfulness," he murmured, "worse than fire. For fire may leave ash from which life might grow, but to forget, to let the name of a thing fade, that is a death no roots can find." The traveler looked down at the bundle in their lap and slowly unwrapped a corner. Within lay a single acorn, dark, polished, still whole. "This is the last of its kind," they said. "The tree it fell from once stood at the heart of a grove where the Entwives danced. Its branches were woven with moonlight, and its fruit sang when the wind passed through. Now the grove is salt and dust. But this Barathornne reached out, not to take, but to feel. It sings still," he whispered quietly. But truly, the traveler wrapped the acorn again, gently, reverently. "It must be planted," they said, "but not in haste, not in hope of return. It must be given to the soil without expectation, as a gift freely offered to a world that may not know how to receive it." Barathornne stood again, the wind tugging at the moss of his beard, and looked northward, where dark clouds gathered over the mountains like thoughts too long held. "Then I will carry it," he said, "and I will find the place where silence waits for song." The traveler said nothing, but their eyes gleamed with something like gratitude. Or perhaps it was sorrow. They handed him the bundle, and his great fingers closed around it with a gentleness born not of fragility, but of reverence. As he turned to leave, the traveler spoke once more. "You will find wrath ahead. They said old wrath, buried deep in root and stone. But remember this, wrath is not the opposite of love. It is its shadow. And even the fiercest storm was born of skies that once held sunlight." Barathornne did not answer, but he carried the words with him, tucked beside the acorn in his memory, as he passed beneath the basalt arch and into the heart of the waiting land. The wind rose behind him once more, not howling but singing, low and mournful, like a cradle song sung at the end of the world. Barathornne descended from the mountain pass like a memory slipping into a forgotten valley, his vast silhouette trailing behind him like the shadow of a thought too heavy to voice. The path had become steeper now, though still more suggestion than trail. A slow unraveling of stone and earth where once, long ago, something deliberate had been carved. Perhaps by shepherds or wanderers, perhaps by those who tended shrines no longer standing. Whatever hands had shaped the way were long since dust. And yet the path endured, as if the ground itself remembered the intent of those who once moved through it with reverence rather than haste. The land below unfolded like a tapestry grown faded with age, its threads dulled but not erased. Hills swelled in muted tones of brown and green, touched here and there by tufts of old heather or the pale banners of ghost grass, swaying like forgotten standards in the evening breeze. The sky had darkened into a deeper slate, casting the world into a softened, dreamlike dimness, as though time itself had slowed to match the pace of the ants' long, ponderous steps. Clouds trailed low across the shoulders of the hills, not heavy with rain, but light and trailing like the last breath of a passing god. The land curved inward, a vast bull cradled between the hills, and at its heart, overgrown and silent, lay the remains of a settlement. Barathornne paused upon a high ridge, gazing down, and the breath that moved through him carried something deeper than air, a sorrow heavy as winter frost, clinging not to skin, but to soul. It had been a village once, small and by mortal reckoning perhaps unremarkable. Yet to Barathornne, even from this distance, it shimmered with that peculiar resonance that marked places where something sacred had been broken. He saw the lines of houses now sunken and roofless, their beams collapsed like ribs cracked beneath a fallen weight. He saw the ring of a central grove, once sacred, perhaps once planted in accordance with stars or solstices, but now choked by vines and overrun by bramble. Even the well at its center had collapsed inward, its stones fallen like teeth from a jaw too long clenched in grief. He descended in silence, each step echoing softly across the hills like a drumbeat in slow mourning. The grass here was stiff and brittle, the kind that had grown without song or hand to guide it. As he passed between the first ruins, he felt the whisper of what had been. A child's laughter lost in time, the scent of smoke from a winter hearth, the soft rhythm of hands weaving reeds into baskets. All gone, all faded, and yet somehow still listening. Near the center of the village stood a tree, or rather what had once been a tree. It was massive, its trunk easily the width of a small cottage, but long dead. Its bark was pale and stripped in places, exposing wood that had dried into ivory veins. Branches jutted out like the limbs of a skeletal titan, clawing toward the sky in a gesture of desperation or accusation. It was hard to tell which. Around it, the ground bore the remnants of fire, charred stones, melted iron, bones too brittle to name. Barathornne approached the tree and placed a hand against its trunk. The wood beneath his palm was cold, lifeless. But beneath that, far beneath, in the place where memory becomes soil, there was a faint hum. Not life, not in the way sap sings or roots murmur, but grief. The kind of grief that lingers long after the mourner is gone. He closed his eyes. "It was here," he said softly, not aloud, but into the quiet space that filled the grove like breath held too long. "You stood here. You planted. You tended. And when they came with fire and fear, you did not flee. You sang until they silenced even that." The wind moved then, curling gently around him. It did not howl, did not rise. It merely stirred as though in assent. He knelt beside the tree rear's base and took from his satchel the acorn wrapped in linen, the last remnant of a grove that had once known the music of Entwives. He held it in his open palm, gazing down at it as if seeing not a seed, but the whole of a world within it. "So small," he murmured, "and yet inside you, the shape of forests not yet imagined. Inside you, the echo of her touch." A voice behind him, sudden and solemn, broke the hush. "You would plant hope in a grave." Barathornne turned. A man stood there, lean and worn, with a face weathered not by age alone, but by experience too deep to speak of lightly. His clothes were simple, wool, leather, fur, but marked with strange sigils along the seams. His hair was silver, not white, and his eyes held the strange clarity of one who had looked too long into the dark, and found within it something worth saving. "I would," Barathornne replied, "because even in graves, roots remember the way up." The man stepped forward slowly, his boots whispering across the dry grass. "Do you believe it will grow?" he asked, his voice low, thoughtful. Here in this place where the ground drank fire and ash, Barathornne looked back to the earth, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then, finally, with a voice as deep as the roots of the mountains themselves, "I do not know, but I believe it must be given the chance. Even if this soil is bitter, even if no leaf unfurls, it is not the growing alone that matters. It is the offering, the placing of something living where death has ruled. Not to defy it, but to remind it that even it is not absolute." The man studied him for a time, then slowly knelt beside him. "I was born here," he said at last, quietly, "before the fire. I remember the tree when it bloomed. The whole village would come to sit beneath its branches. My mother said the tree listened to our songs. I used to press my ear to its trunk and pretend I could hear its heart." Barathornne said nothing. He merely lowered the acorn to the earth, brushing aside a layer of dead leaves to reveal the pale, cracked soil beneath. "You came here," the man said, "not only to find her, but to forgive this place." Barathornne nodded, and to ask it to forgive itself. Together, in silence, they planted the seed. No prayer was spoken, none was needed. The act itself was the prayer. When it was done, the man stood, and Barathornne rose with him. They stood in the quiet of the grove, and the wind stirred once more, softer now, and for the first time in many long years, it smelled faintly of green. And far beneath the soil where roots dream, the acorn stirred. Barathornne lingered in the hollow of the grove long after the man had gone, his presence dissolving into the dusk, like a thought dismissed, but not forgotten. The light had grown dimmer, not merely from the hour, but from the deepening hush that settled over the valley. A hush so complete it seemed to press upon the air itself, as if the land were drawing in a long, slow breath, uncertain whether to release it as sigh or song. The wind, too, had ceased, and the world held its stillness with the grave reverence of a vigil. The tree, dead and towering still, loomed above the newly planted acorn, a sentinel of what had been and what might yet be. Its bark no longer pulsed with sap, but the way the last glimmers of twilight touched it, catching on the ridges and creases on the long-healed scars where fire had climbed, suggested that it still bore the memory of sunlight, like an old warrior wearing the ghost of armor he once trusted. Barathornne stood with one massive hand resting lightly upon the trunk. His fingers spled as though trying to read its tale through touch alone. The wood beneath was cold, but not indifferent. There was still story in it, still ache. And in Barathorne's heart there grew a silence unlike any he had known before. Not the silence of empty glades or starless nights, but the silence of release, of something deep and long buried, beginning at last to rise. A silence that felt not like absence, but like listening, a quiet so profound that it seemed the forest of his soul had ceased to move, waiting for something only the earth itself could teach. Then came a sound, soft, subtle, barely more than the brush of wind over distant grass. But to Barathornne it rang with the clarity of a bell struck in dream. Barathornne. He turned slowly, not with urgency, but with the reverence of one who turns to meet a memory that might yet still be living. There was no one there, only the grove, only the whisper of leaves, only the long sigh of evening turning toward night. And yet the voice had not been dream. It had not been illusion. It had come not from within, but from beyond, and it had known his name. He took a step forward, his great footfall pressing gently into the lawn, leaving no wound. Then another. Toward the far edge of the grove, where the trees thickened again, where shadows deepened and the path fell away into the rolling dark. The air here had changed. It was cooler, moistester. The scent of moss grew richer. The hush of the forest grew deeper, not oppressive, but expectant, as though it too had heard. And then there faint upon the wind again. Come. He did not speak. Words in this moment were leaves too fragile to carry the weight of what stirred within him. He walked slowly, carefully, each movement and act of devotion, not just to the voice, but to the memory it carried, the resonance it awakened. The path curved downward now into a shallow dell, where moonlight pulled like water in the hollows between trees. The canopy overhead, thick with leaves of silver shadowed green, filtered the light into a soft, shifting web. Here the trees were not dead, not entirely, but neither were they thriving. They stood like old thoughts, barely remembered, their bark streaked with lichen and their branches heavy with silence. The ground was uneven, moss-covered and strewn with stones shaped by centuries of unseen hands. And at the center of the dell stood a stone. It was tall, narrow, worn down by wind and time, but still upright, a monolith, a marker, a memory. Its surface was etched with symbols so faint they might have been the work of rain rather than chisel. But Barathornne recognized them, not by sight, by rhythm, by feeling. These were the sigils of the Entwives. Their speech not written in lines or letters, but in curves and spirals, in the echo of seasons and the breath of growing things. He stepped closer. The stone was warm, not in the way of sunlit rock, but in the way of something that remembers being held, something that remembers belonging. He placed his hand upon it and closed his eyes. What rose within him then was not memory, but sensation. Feeling that had no words, no images, only depth. He felt the laughter of spring mornings where blossoms danced in hands not his own. He felt the rhythm of steps through wild gardens, each movement a blessing upon the soil. He felt the brush of fingers against bark, not pruning, not taking, but greeting. And he felt most of all the presence of Nimloth, not her face, not her voice, but her soul. That particular warmth that had once leaned against his own, like wind against mountain. That fierce gentleness which had taught vines to climb and seeds to open, not by command, but by invitation. That sorrowful joy she had worn like a cloak, always knowing that to love the world was to let it go, leaf by leaf, season by... Barathornne fell to his knees, not in despair, not in grief, but in awe. And then at last he spoke. "If you are here," he said, his voice low and steady, "then let the earth bear witness. I have carried your memory through fire and I have walked where trees weep and where soil forgets. I have planted what remained when nothing else could grow, and I have asked nothing in return but the right to remember you without pain." He paused, and the night deepened around him, drawing the stars closer as though even they had come to listen. "If you are not here," he continued, "then let this be my last lament, not of sorrow, but of wonder that I ever knew you at all." The wind stirred, and then from the far edge of the dell, beyond the stone, from between two trees bent low with the weight of forgotten seasons, she stepped forth. She did not shine, she did not radiate, she did not float or shimmer or rise. She walked softly, silently, like the unfolding of a leaf in morning light. And Barathornne knew, not by sight or scent or sound, but by the movement of his own roots, the deep, unspoken truth that dwells in the stillness of old trees, that Nimloth had returned. Her eyes met his, and the forest for one breathless moment remembered how to sing. She stood before him, not as a vision wrought of dreams or longing, not as some spectral echo drawn from memory or illusion, but as herself, tall and stately as the silver-barked birches of her homeland, with limbs that moved like boughs in the hush of evening wind, and eyes deep with the knowing of seasons lost, and the quiet courage of those who tend rather than conquer. Nimloth had not changed in the way the world had changed. She bore no scars of fire, no bitterness carved into the lines of her presence. Yet she was not untouched. There was a solemnity in her gaze, a kind of weathering that spoke of exile, not only from land, but from song, from all the voices that had once answered hers, now fallen to silence or soot. Around them, the dell had shifted. The trees leaned inward ever so slightly, as if bowing, not in submission, but in reverence. The very moss beneath their feet seemed greener, as if awakened from some long dormancy. Overhead the sky remained dark, but a pale wash of starlight spilled down like a river of forgotten names, brushing Nimloth's hair with glints of silver. A hush deeper than mere quiet filled the grove, not empty, but saturated with possibility, with memory, with the ache of two truths colliding at last. Reunion, and the impossibility of returning to what once was. Barathornne, still upon his knees, raised his eyes to meet hers, and for a long, unmeasured time, neither of them spoke. Not for lack of words, but because the air between them was already full of the unsaid, the weight of years that had passed like fallen leaves, of questions turned to roots, of hopes too fragile to name aloud. And then at last Nimloth stepped forward, her movements slow, not hesitant but deliberate, like someone walking into the wind. Her voice, when it came, was not what he remembered. It was softer, lower, shaped by solitude, but still carried the cadence of growing things, the subtle insistence of life pushing through soil toward light. "You came," she said, and the words were not a greeting, nor a judgment, but a wonder. "After all this time, through all the endings the world has known, you still carried the sound of me within you." Barathornne's voice rose like the creak of old boughs yielding to a sunrise. "I could not forget," he said, "not because I willed to remember, but because forgetting would have meant severing the root that held me to meaning. And without that, what is an ant but a hollow trunk, a voice without echo, a song broken at the first note?" She drew closer. "But you did not come from memory alone. You carried more than longing. I felt it in the roots of the world before I saw your shape upon the hill. You brought wrath." Barathornne lowered his head, and for a moment he was silent. "Yes," he said at last, slowly, "I brought wrath. Not the rage of fire or the fury of beasts, but the deeper wrath. What rises when guardianship is betrayed, when patience is mistaken for consent, when the slow are trampled beneath the haste of axes and the hunger of men." He looked up at her, and his eyes, the weary, glowed faintly with the light of old stars. "But I planted hope instead." Nimloth's gaze softened, and for the first time she knelt before him, so that they were eye to eye, root to root, sorrow to sorrow. "You always listened," she murmured. "Even when the world stopped speaking, even when our song became too quiet for most to hear, you listened. And in listening, you kept the memory alive." Her hands, slender barked, veined with moss and moonlight, rose and touched his face. It was a gesture so tender it might have shattered stone. And Barathornne closed his eyes. "I feared," he whispered, "that I would find only absence, that your voice would be wind only I could hear, that I had waited too long, hoped too foolishly, that I had come not to find you, but only the grave of what you once were." Her voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the strength of long-held grief finally allowed to breathe. "We feared, too. We who left, we who wandered, we who sought gardens where no fire would touch, and in so doing became scattered, lost in the folds of the world's forgetting. We feared that no one would come, that the song we had sung was over, and the silence we chose would be the end of us." She bowed her head, and her next words were shaped not of regret, but of truth too deep for shame. "And in the silence I remembered you. I remembered your stillness, your waiting. I remembered that you did not need to be heard to be present, that you stood always not as a monument to the past, but as a keeper of what still might be. A single tear of sap, or starlight, or both, slid down Barathornne's cheek. "There is a wound in the forest," he said. "In the world where the Entwives once sang, there is now only absence, a hollow that echoes with loss too large for roots to bind." And yet he placed his hand upon the earth over the acorn they had buried. "I believe something will grow, not what was, but what must be." They sat together in the stillness, not speaking for a long time, because in some meetings words are only the shadow of what is truly said. Around them the dell began to shift, not visibly, not yet, but the soil remembered. The roots stirred. The trees, once bent with grief, began to lean toward one another again. Nimloth rose first. "There are others," she said. "Still wanderings, still waiting. Not all have perished. Not all have been silenced. If we listen, truly listen, we can call them home." Barathornne stood beside her. "Then let us call," he said, "not with fury, but with remembrance, with roots that stretch and songs that bloom again." She turned to him, her face a tapestry of sorrow and dawn. "And if the world does not hear, then we will sing louder." They walked from the grove side by side. The hush around them filled now not with mourning, but with promise. The stars above, old as time and just as patient, shone down upon them like leaves of silver fire. And beneath the soil, in the darkness, where all things begin, the acorn dreamed. It dreamed of branches yet to grow, of birds yet to nest, of winds yet to carry songs not sung in an age. The forest, once wrathful, was waking, not in rage, but in